there's nothing that can be said, in my opinion, in favor of glyphosate. And so if you're getting to the stage where you are going in a good direction environmentally, but you're still using glyphosate, unless you can come up with some way that you're phasing it out quite clearly and being held to the feet to the fire to phase the stuff out over a relatively short period of years, certainly no more than 4 or 5 years, then I think there's nothing to say at all about regenerative farming. Because regeneration really means, to me, it's not organic farming. Organic farming is about a system that goes on and goes on and goes on and goes on. Whereas regeneration means you bring something back from the dead, if you like, and you recover it in order for it to go on and on and on and on like organic farming.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Linley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture. You just heard from Peter Segger, a Welsh farmer and member of the UK's Soil Association. The Soil Association was founded way back in 1946 to support organic agriculture as a way to counter the growing pesticide industry that emerged out of World War II. Peter helped to craft and promote the Soil Association's messaging in the 1980s with Patrick Holden, who we interviewed on the 154th episode of this show. Patrick and Peter's efforts greatly helped to grow the market for organic food in the UK. Dave recently spoke to Peter in hopes of learning more about the author E.F. Schumacher, who wrote the book Small is Beautiful, a study of economics as if people mattered. They touch on this and much, much more in their conversation.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast, and I'm having the pleasure, I'm in the middle of a conversation with Peter Segger from Blind Camel Farm. I didn't pronounce that perfectly because it's Welsh, in Wales. Peter, it's a pleasure. Maybe first, your early days in farming, how did you even, I think that you did not grow up in a farm family. How did you get the idea of getting into farming and organic farming?
I grew up in Scotland. I was educated in Scotland. And I came down to London in 1963 and then did lots of things. So it was a bit like when we were having a discussion, when I asked you one time, what did you do in your life before you became a grower? And you said lots of things. And it's the same with me, lots of things, but none of them to do with farming. I never had any connection with farming, other than I like to walk out amongst farms, particularly in Scotland. But I came down to London and then I did various things in the music industry and all sorts of things. I was supposed to be a scientist. That was what I was supposed to be, a physicist. But that didn't really work out terribly well. I worked for the government's scientific naval service, of all things, testing and stressing all sorts of different types of metals and plugging accelerometers into the hulls of submarines and all sorts of silly things like that. But the end of my career in that came when I was working in my laboratory and all these admirals came in all dressed up and looking very smart and posh. And then they pointed to me and said, "Who's that girl over in the corner?" And that was the time when any men who had long hair were referred to in an effeminate sort of manner. And I thought, I don't want to live with people like that or work like people like that. So I left. And I went and got a job in the food industry. And after a while, I succeeded in that and it developed and I became interested in food. More and more and more. Just the whole idea of food being a difficult thing to produce, because I also worked with fishing people, and dangerous thing to produce. People died. I watched people die. Producing food was a very, very sensitive, delicate, dangerous world. And people didn't really appreciate it very much. I didn't, certainly not, and neither did anybody else I knew. But I had moved from London out to the countryside and had an ancient 500-year-old cottage, very small, but a thatched cottage. And I loved it, and I loved it, and I loved the farmers who surrounded me. I was in the middle of a farm, and I kept going to the farmer and saying, well, would you like to become organic farmer? I think you should. You know, the market is, I mean, I knew nothing. I mean, nothing at all. I'd become vegetarian, and so therefore I had an interest in going to the farmers' markets and buying my vegetables and things like that. So you pick up ideas, no chemicals. Terrible thing, chemicals. So actually, I was then telling this man he should become organic farmer. The family had been farming for generation after generation, and he was so kind and tolerant of me. And I kept saying it, and eventually, after about a year, it got to a situation. He said, "Peter, I'm not changing, but if you really want to become an organic farmer, become one. Don't just talk about it." I thought, that's a good point. I'm not sure if I've got an answer to that. So I went out, I sold my business, didn't get very much for it because it was right in the middle of a recession at the time. The country was going through terrible times. But I got enough, and I sold my house that I dearly loved. And within a few months, I was traveling all over Britain looking for a small farm that I could find. But it had to be beautiful. I didn't know anything about land and soil or anything like that, but I knew I needed to find something that was pretty, had flat fields so I could grow vegetables on it. And and it was not near to any big city. So I found this place eventually in West Wales, right on the coast of West Wales. I can almost see the United States from where I live, not quite obviously. And so that's what I did. And I came down to Wales and I decided to start. I had no idea what to do, but we started and bought books and read books. So you would go out to plant peas, for example. So you take about 4 or 5 gardening books to learn how to plant the peas and understand words like drill and throwing seeds into the drill and what's a drill and all that sort of question. Anyway, we did that, and then I got involved in trying to figure out how I would grow vegetables in this climate, which turned out to be, contrary to what my expectations were, absolutely soaking wet with rain. And also the fields where, when I bought them, they were lovely pastures of green, verdant sort of picture. But it was raining. It rained for 9 months solid, almost every single day. So rushes and weeds and things like that came up. Eventually it dried up a bit. We ploughed, only to find the whole place was covered in boulders and stones and rocks. And I remember the first time Patrick came to see the farm, not long afterwards, and he said, you will never grow vegetables in land like that. And it was a sensible thing to say. I mean, of course he was wrong, but it was a sensible thing to say. But we were learning how to do it, and by one means or another, I eventually figured out a system of using ridges and drills to keep the plants above the ground and to keep the stones down a bit. And it was just practicing, seeing how we could grow. And we started producing crops immediately, but not very much. Anyway, eventually I got involved more and more, and then we gathered together a lot of people in Wales. I thought, well, if I don't know how to do it, there must be other people around here who also don't know how to do it. So why don't we come together to learn how to grow crops organically? Because that was my objective, to grow crops organically.
Peter, can I interrupt for a moment? Yeah. Can I ask you what year was it when you came to the land?
74.
74. I'm trying to put it in a context so that people can understand why there was not much information about organic farming available back then.
Nothing.
There was information, I think, about organic gardening, but
And there was some information about organic farming in the sense that we know it, in cattle, beef, arable crops. Because there were quite a few large-scale organic farmers in the Soil Association then. And so some of them wrote books, and there was quite a bit of information. But for horticulture, nothing, absolutely nothing at all. So you could go nowhere to get anything. And since we didn't know anybody, we couldn't, until we could build up a network of connections, we had nowhere to go to get anything. So we just had to find a means to doing that. And what I was feeling was basically the same as what everybody else all around the country. So we had to find a way to find all these people. And that was the work of the next few years, from 74 onwards, up till the big breakthrough was in 1979, the end of 1979, when we held the first real conference of organic growers in Britain. And that was a huge success. I mean, we found about 300 people, and they all came for a weekend, and we just talked weeds and compost and green manures and all sorts of things like that. Just learning bucketfuls, by the way, which is wonderful, wonderful. But it was in that I got more and more involved in the mid-70s, 75, 76, with the Soil Association, because the Soil Association was the preeminent body for organic matters. It was a holistic organization, and it had been formed just at the end of the Second World War, and had some amazing.
What does that mean? What does that mean in a holistic organization?
It was connected. It was connecting the principles of return to the soil of all waste materials, working within yourself, looking at the question of health and connecting health with the crops that you were growing and that the animals were eating, and connecting that with the environment and building up a body of knowledge that showed how the environment can react in different ways depending on how you're actually managing it, and bringing that into the question of human beings and the health of human beings, dependent on the health of the animals they eat, the green crops they were eating, and the soil they were managing, basically. So it was that interconnection between soil, plants, animal, and man, and bringing them all together and investigating how they work together and how they benefited each other and their relative importance. And that was something that I felt very, very, very strongly, but had no idea why. It just seemed to me the most natural thing in the world. But that was what the Soil Association were doing. They were connecting everything as though it was one whole entity, be it Cosmos or be it the garden patch in your backyard. And so we got involved in all that. And then I became a council member of the Soil Association. And then we decided, because of Schumacher, Schumacher was the president at the time I joined. I had met him once before. He came to visit the farm here down in Wales. And I knew him because one of my best friends in London was his gardener. And so I was told all sorts of anecdotes, that passed it by at the time. And it was wonderful. I mean, lots of little anecdotes, like how every morning he made the bread. He ground the flour. He didn't buy flour. He ground the wheat, and he made the flour, and he made the bread, and he ate the bread, and he did it every morning. It was a completely Gandhian sort of approach. And it painted a picture of the man which was quite accurate. He was a very gentle, very wise and a very attractive man in many ways, and a good thinker. And I was very lucky. I had a friend who knew about him and knew about his gardening and invited him to come and see us.
Let me interrupt for a moment, because I know that probably the majority of people who will listen to this don't know who E.F. Schumacher
Right.
was. And they probably, even possibly the majority, have never heard of the book Small is Beautiful.
Right.
So I think some education here would be helpful. I've gotten to interview Francis Moore Lepay, and that was a very impactful book.
Yes.
And of course, there have been a few other books that were very impactful, but I think that Small is Beautiful was one of those books. But things change, people pass, and they're often forgotten, even though their influence continues. It's just not attributed.
You are completely right. I mean, to my knowledge, Small is Beautiful was a small book produced by Schumacher, E.F. Schumacher, who came for the first time to Britain in 1930, and he came to study as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford from Germany, where he was born, and then clearly decided to get out of Germany in the mid-late 30s before the trouble seriously started. And of course, he was immediately imprisoned when war started, because every German was imprisoned. And he was then looked after, and he was looked after by another wonderful person, but we won't go into too much now because it would take too long, called David Astor. And David Astor organized for Schumacher to go and work on the land in the east of England. So for most of the war, he worked on the land. And that's what he did. He was an economist. He studied all sorts of things as well. But he then, after the war in 1947, he was asked by the British government to go back to Germany and organize the whole reconstruction of Germany. And as an economist, that's what he would contribute. And so he did that. And David Astor helped him enormously, because he got him to start writing columns. And the columns were printed in The Observer. And The Observer is a British Sunday newspaper, the oldest Sunday newspaper in the world, and a very good paper as opposed to some of the rubbish we have. He wrote columns in that, and people like us would read them on a Sunday. And he wrote wonderful ones. And I remember one of the greatest ones was the one entitled "The Party's Over Now." And I remember adding to it, yeah, but nobody's told the people they have to go home. And this was referring to the oil crisis, because we then had oil crisis building up. And so everybody started to think a little bit about, well, what do you do when the price of oil rises so quickly you can't get hold of it? And we're told we depend on it totally for our living. And it just happened that Schumacher would write columns and just address those points. And eventually they came together into a book that actually brought together lots of these stories and ideas in a way that people like us who had been reading the columns but saw them all together and said, yeah, that's right. That makes sense to me. And that happened to, I don't know how many people, but untold numbers of people around the world who read the story, even though they never knew about Britain, never knew about Schumacher particularly, but they read and picked up and discussed the concepts of smallness as opposed to the drug, if you like, of scale, largeness, gigantism, all these different concepts that were building industry into something that actually had deleterious consequences for society and was beginning to be seen to deliver deleterious consequences. People like Rachel Carson, people like Maur Lappé, I mean, all sorts of other people in different parts of the world, because all over the world at that time, from the very late 60s to the mid 70s, people were migrating from the cities to country areas and to farms to find a new way to live, a different way to live. And in my life, one of the most extraordinary and things that I'm most grateful and humble for is to have met a lot of these people by accident in many ways, all over the place. I bumped into them. I mean, if you went to Washington State, you couldn't help but bump into heaven knows how many people, like Roger Wexler and Gene, what's his name? Anyway, I can't remember his name. My memory's gone quite bad. And I met in Alaska, and I met in Chile, and I met in China, and I met in all sorts of places, guys with the same hair color as I have now, and they didn't have it then either, but they have now, and of the same age, who had gone for the same sort of reasons in their own country, in their own culture, to look at a different way to live, to find a different way to understand the planet, and also to look at their lives, at our lives, and how we were going to handle our lives, and what meaning could we get out of our life that made sense. And Schumacher was the guy who did all that for us with this book, God Small is Beautiful, which came back into vogue. Oh, when was it? I think it was in the early 2000s, maybe late 1990s, early 2000s. It happened that a whole lot of people, young people then, suddenly started picking this up again and reading it. And we knew a lot of this because one of the wonderful things that Schumacher did for us in the Soil Association, of which he was the president, because the Soil Association had been running all sorts of experiments, scientific experiments on farms in England and losing a bucket load of money doing it. You know, nobody ever got rich doing research into organic farming. And we were almost bankrupt. And Schumacher decided to give out and to leave in his will all the royalties from Small is Beautiful to the Soil Association, which saved us. Yeah. And allowed us to carry on doing the work that and people are still doing to this day. So he had an extraordinary effect on us.
Let me again create a little context, because I'm sure much of our audience won't even know what the Soil Association is. Yes. And I knew about it early because of Eliot Coleman, and Eliot had very strong connections with the European organic movement.
Yes.
And for me, the Soil Association was this, shining house on the hill that was a place where a lot of the thinking came to us, obviously through Lady Eve Balfour. I'm curious. I understand, I don't understand, but I know that Albert Howard chose not to be part of the Soil Association. There was a disagreement. Do you know what that disagreement was about?
No, I don't. I tried to find out. If I really wanted to, I could have found out, but I didn't find out because I had my own sort of struggles with the Soil Association. I'm just an ordinary guy who was brought up in Scotland, and these people who were hallowed figures with incredible intelligence and insight, but they were most often not conservative, right-leaning landed gentry in many, many ways, not all, and in many ways. And so this being a left-leaning sort of non-landed gentry type person created a sort of potential for friction, particularly as the originators of the Soil Association mostly got older and older. And we were under all sorts of pressure, the young ones, because in on the continent of Europe, organizations like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth were growing quickly and being quite radical. And everything in Britain was being tamped down into the aristocratic, right-leaning, conservative thinking, slow manner of approaching change and approaching government. And we wanted to become radicals. We wanted to become what we became, the young Turks of the agricultural industry in Britain. And I had enough to do to worry about that, to worry about what Albert Howard was up to, other than the fact that he was my biggest hero anyway.
Yes, yes. Well, of course, Rodale brought the teachings of Albert Howard to America. So in America, Albert is much better known than most of the other people, even Lady Eve, who I think, for people who know, there's a great respect for her book and for her work. She did so much, but her name is not nearly as well known as that of Howard. So there was a conflict of some sort between this old guard and the new guard in defining what the Soil Association would be.
This happened towards the end of the 1970s, early 1980s. There was, because I had managed to bring into the Soil Association Council a lot of young farmers and growers, people like Patrick Holden, who. Well, people wouldn't know him in America, I don't suppose. Well, a lot of people do, but I don't suppose he's widely known. And Lawrence Woodward, who was very well known in Europe, and a lot of other people. So we had a whole raft of young people, all of whom wanted to change. They were impatient for change, and they were all growers and farmers, millers, all sorts of things, but committed to a different way to produce food and to create and develop better health. And
yes,
they were. But well, just to finish, the people who were there, I was referring to. I don't want to cast aspersions into all of these people by any means, but there were some extraordinary people there. I mean, when I read back to the people who actually started the concept of really going back to making bread with wholemeal flour, and people who looked at trees in a different way, people who looked at farmland in a different way, an organic way. I mean, in every aspect of society, there were individuals who were luminaries that shone like the brightest stars you could imagine. And they were there sitting around the table, and there were people like me who knew nothing about anything. And we were just so lucky. It was just a coincidence of time. But Schumacher was the leader of all of this until he died, and unfortunately quite suddenly in 76, I think it was. Because he had not only set up and done all the work to become president of the Soil Association, he also set up an organization called Intermediate Technology. And intermediate technology was set up to bring the concept of small is beautiful to work in Africa, to the people of the villages in Africa. And it did so much work to create wells and all sorts of things, gadgets that would do the work necessary, but without being expensive and without using all sorts of higher technology. Everything was intermediate. It's now called practical action. It's got, like these things do, the new name, but it's ever so well known all over Africa and parts of Asia.
Yeah. So, there's a thing that I encounter a great deal, which is, this division in organic in America. And we have a lot of corporate farms, big companies coming in, like Driscoll's, like Grimway, like Taylor Farms, California farms. And of course, Driscoll's is international. Well, they're all international now. And I think that they don't have much sense of connection with those ideas of holistic organic agriculture. They see it as following some rules in order to get certified. And I don't know, but in my mind, I think of, I've heard that Patrick and Lady Eve had a conflict because Patrick wanted to develop certification so that farmers could make a living and connect with the people who wanted to buy that food. And Lady Eve was concerned about the loss of integrity that might come by trying to reduce something that was very complex to a set of rules.
Yeah.
And that battle, of course, continues to this day. And I know that Patrick very much wanted it to be part of a social movement. And I think it is meant to, on both sides, meant to include far more than just farming.
Yeah.
So
it's true, all you say. It has been a little bit different, but not vastly different in Europe. A little bit more subtle, shall we say, that you might expect. How can I best describe it? The difference, in the beginning, there was really no difference. People, the big industry, big ag, big food, whatever you want to call them, they didn't pretend to be anything different to what they were. And they didn't want to get involved in organic food. I mean, they just had no interest. And then it changed, of course. Money matters and markets change. And so, like in America, the big companies decided to get involved. That created the problem. And for me, that was difficult because I was the person responsible for bringing organic food into British supermarkets. Generally, well, not so much British food, but British vegetables and fruits and salads and fresh produce. And that was very difficult because when the big industries decided to get involved, they have ways of manipulating their customers to get what they want and make it interesting for the supermarkets to want to make change. And so we struggled with that for a long time and partly succeeded and partly didn't. But the main interest is really changing a bit at the moment because, well, you will know it. We've seen changes in the approach of people to medicine, particularly, and therefore beginning a change to a different attitude to health by recognizing the concept of vast quantities of tiny little creatures that live in our guts, in our bodies, and do nothing but good in a way that was never understood. In fact, if it had been mentioned, was ridiculed in previous years, and not that long ago either. So suddenly the idea of having all your protozoas and your bacteria and your fungi and your this and your that in your body suddenly became a better thing. And you better do something fundamental in your diet to encourage that because it's in your self-interest. And this is not an argument that is a parochial argument to the organic movement or organic food. It is to people. It's a generalization, if you like. But the question where it becomes a little bit more complex, of course, is that in order to do that, you then, as you begin to understand that in growing food and working with the soil, you have the same populations in terms of vastness of numbers and the same types of species going around the soil working to do good things to the soil in the same way as those same creatures are doing good things for your body and your health. So suddenly the big industry type people are now beginning to find it quite difficult to rationalize the things and maintain an antagonistic approach. And so they are dropping it. We've seen quite a few large companies now entering into the discussions about looking at nutrient density, looking at food quality, looking at all these different aspects, things that we've been doing and working at and talking about for 25, 35 or more years, a long time, as well as all the other ideas of food and production of food, rather, when it comes to the environment, the carbon and the carbon dioxide and the pesticides and everything else. Suddenly, it is not so easy for big industry to be so dismissive of the cranks, as they used to call them, nowadays. Now, does that mean that they're all signing up to a different way of living? Well, it would be nice if it were true, but it is happening more and more. I'm more surprised than anything at what changes have happened recently. Even in Wales, here, a small part of Britain, we have seen a change in the last 2 years where we've brought the government round by means of just exposing them to good practice when they can walk onto good farms, good growers holdings, seeing things that work, and that farms and families that have made a living for quite a long time producing food that people seem to want more of, and finding it difficult to find ways to, other than the financial cost of producing it, finding ways to decry it and put it down. And that's the big change that's happening, Dave. We're now getting government, actually, as we speak tonight, I have to finish off a paper that goes to the Welsh government where they will increase the amount of money that they will give to organic farmers and growers, particularly horticulturalists, who never got anything before, because everything was any money. It would be the same in America, I suspect. If you were going to get grants or subsidies from the government, you got it for land areas normally, rather than methods of production or systems of production, rotations and things like that. And that's the same here, but that's changed now. So that you can get quite large amounts of money if you're going to become a top fruit producer or a tomato grower or a general horticulturalist. And that's because it costs a lot of money to do that. And they've recognized those realities. And they said, well, if we have to pay more money, we have to pay more money. And so that's wonderful to happen. But it's all these things all connect in. When I take them back, they go back to different conferences where different people like Elliot Coleman came over and trained our growers. And people like Schumacher helped and financed our growers. And other people came along, millions of people from all over the world came and helped everybody else. And we went and helped everybody in other parts of the world to do things that cause change to happen. And sometimes you have to wait an awful long time. I remember we had at the early conferences in the 1980s, we were so gung-ho and enthusiastic. I remember I had one of our magazines, I had the banner headline, because I was, I think, in charge of it then, was we were going to 25%, 50% of Britain would be organic within 5 years. And we had that down, and we went on television and radios and things like that to proclaim this with such complete, honest conviction that it would happen, because we wanted it to happen. And it didn't happen. But we didn't stop saying, well, it might take a few more years. So we'll have it in a few more years. But so all these things come about, and they're all changing bit by bit by bit for the better. The health thing, the intestines of the soil, the intestines of the human beings, all of that relying on a system of whole food, whole in the sense that it's not the elements that are necessary, it's the biology that's necessary as well. And all of that's happening.
So let me challenge you or ask. I'm really curious because I really don't know what it's like in England. I mean, when you talk about increased funding right now, all the funding to organic is going away under the new regime. So yeah. It's a huge shift. Lots of people are losing their jobs who are doing support for organic farmers. But I'm curious. I asked Michael Pollan a question once. It was a genuine question because I said, Michael, I am confused. In the 15 years since Omnivore's Dilemma came out, do you think that the food system is getting better or worse? Because I'm really confused. I see both sides. And he said, I think that the understanding is getting much better. In the general population, there's much more deep thinking about what does it mean, biological agriculture, are we doing things right? But the actual food system is getting worse. And I thought, I think that's right. In America, I think that's the truth.
No, I would say it's getting worse in many ways here too. No, I wouldn't demur from that at all. But that's not the picture. That's not the story. I don't think it's the answer. And I'm sure that Michael Pollan, wonderful person that he is, if he were to think about it, I think he could take a more enthusiastic sort of line of defense than that, because it's true, but also what I said earlier is also happening. So you've got different things happening. The population, the obesity problems, and the illnesses that come from obesity in this country is as bad as not. I'm not just saying it's worse than or better than anywhere else, but it's pretty damn bad, and particularly in this part of Britain where I live in Wales, it's very bad. But it's beginning to change, and it's the same way as you had with, for example, smoking. I mean, everybody recognized after quite a long time and a lot of work, science, research, propaganda, advertising, that smoking was bad for you. But did everybody stop smoking? No, of course they didn't. But some did. And the next year, some more did. And the next year, a lot more did. And so it went on and on. And as it progressed, the numbers of people stopping every year increased and increased and increased. And it's very difficult to make huge demographic changes quickly. But you need to be patient, but you need not to ever give up. So you have to keep punching and also we made lots of mistakes in our arguments. We made lots of mistakes in our approach to. We were messianic, shall we say, to a degree that was uncalled for and unnecessary. But it's what was in our hearts. It was what was also in our heads, and we brought those together with a lot of power and not a lot of patience. But it still doesn't deny the fact that now people are looking at, governments are looking at the whole question of diet and sugar and this and salt. They're looking at the wholeness of vegetables. Our school meals, led by the people of Denmark and Germany and in Italy, have brought organic food into millions of school children, millions and millions of school children. And we're seeing it here. Most of the schools in Wales now are getting some amount of organic vegetables in their diet every day. And it's gone from nothing 4 years ago to something small this past year. And it's going about a 50% increase again this year. So it will grow from a tiny base. It will grow more and more. And government is paying for it, and big industry is partly paying for it as well. So and the other idea that I would say Patrick Horton is primarily in the world responsible for, I might be biased because he's a very good friend, but is the idea that food costs much more than people think it costs. That the old question about the true cost of food. And, I remember coming to the conference in San Francisco on that subject, the true cost of American food. That was an amazing conference, and we learned all sorts of stuff there and got a lot of enthusiasm for what was going on in the United States then. But that's happening. The whole question about the real cost of food isn't settled yet by any means, but it's not it's not a concept that you can just dismiss. It has got intellectual power behind it, and it will get more evident year by year by year. I think, I'm sure. So I'm sure we can come back to Michael Pollan, and you can ask the self-same question in about 2 or 3 years, and I would hope then that he would give you an equally profound answer.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I will try to ask the same question. I actually don't see the food system getting better in the next 2 or 3 years. I interview a lot of people and a lot of smart, knowledgeable academics, and they see the use of chemicals only increasing
Oh, really? Yeah,
on a national level. I mean, herbicides are there seems to be no roof. They just keep, inventing new ones to deal with the fact that the old ones aren't working as well, and they keep using them. And of course, we see cancer rate going up, and certainly one of the reasons is our agricultural chemicals.
sure.
Um,
Don't get me
so
wrong. Don't get me wrong, Dave. Please. As I said, we have these problems over here. But the one thing that's happened, led by the European Union primarily, and now by the British, they have to give money to farming so far. I mean, you said in America that they're not giving money, but so far they still have to give money. They have moved everything away from paying money to farmers because of the amount of land they have, or the amount of cattle they have, or the amount of crops they have. It all now has to be, they'll get no money, the farmers, unless it's for public goods that have been provided by the farmers. So it's public money for public goods. That's the mantra, and that's the law that's now come in. So farmers can get all sorts of money if they provide reservoirs for wildlife, beetle banks, this, that, and if they reduce the amount of chemicals they use. If they reduce the amount of pesticides, fertilizers, and things like that, they get paid extra money for doing that. And they get paid money for having rotations. They get paid extra money for having clover in their mixture, in their grass and silage mixtures. They get paid money for all sorts, and that's part of our job, is to write up, to look at the holistic system and look at all the aspects of the system, be it horticulture, agriculture, forestry, that all the aspects that can impact the environment and the conservation of species, and where you can demonstrate through scientific, evidence, then you can get paid money for it. And that money should equal, this is where it becomes, we cross our fingers and hope it works out as they say it's going to work. It transferred the money that was going before into the old way of financing farmers into this new way. And that's
yes,
more or less all over Europe. And
yeah.
I mean, I see these things always with enthusiasm and with hope that it's going to work out quicker than I expect. So mostly,
We were very inspired by the Farm to Fork initiative in the EU.
yes,
Amazing achievement to it wasn't a law, but it was an initiative
yeah,
with the goal of reducing
yeah,
the use of chemicals by 50% and increasing organic up to 25% of the land base.
yeah.
Was that also adopted in England after Brexit?
No, it's not adopted in the sense that they don't have targets yet. They sort of don't believe in targets. And I have some sympathy with that idea, but anyway, No, it started in Europe. Well, you know when it started in the continent of Europe. Um, you have to listen to people like me who answer that question in that way because I'm a European and I've always been a European and I always will be a European. So when they talk about Europe, that's me as well. So I talk about the European
Yes.
Union if I have to, but not. Anyway, that's a mild personal aside. But no, they haven't in Britain put targets on the figures as yet. In the past, they have done, but not at the moment.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
I
I'm
think
just curious.
well,
That initiative was severely attacked by our USDA.
oh, was it?
Yes.
Oh,
Tom Vilsack personally went right after it. He
okay.
thought it was the work of the devil. It was anti-scientific. It was obviously anti-corporate. I mean, these were his statements, not mine.
Yeah. Well, I think even over here we've heard well of Mr. Vilsack over many years,
Yeah.
and so we're not surprised at what you say at the moment.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but it is sad. It is, I mean, genuinely sad that a country like America, with such vast resources and vast differences in interests and demands, cannot find a way to encourage a more widespread adoption of agriculture that is patently of some interest, to put it mildly, to a large part of the population in their interest, financial interest, in their health interest, and their environmental interest. And if you think these denying them that right will make all the problems of agriculture go away, then he's making a very big mistake.
Yeah. Do you think, based on your research, your understanding, your cares, um, I'm assuming that you don't believe that a carrot is a carrot, and that one carrot grown in one way is going to have a very different health impact than a carrot grown in a very industrial chemical way. And I ask this question because I know people in this country who are involved in something that's called Food is Health movement, and their goal is primarily, it's a wonderful goal, to get people to stop eating junk food and to get them to eat vegetables and wheat and meat, but they just don't mention organic, and they don't mention the significant, in my mind, nutritional differences between some whole foods and other whole foods. Would you comment on that?
Well, it's an old story, it's an old argument, and it's nonetheless more as important to keep discussing it. I'm not sure. I sort of believe all these aspects have got something important to say about them. But basically, I'm not. I don't go out every day banging on the drum to say you should all be called organic farmers or organic growers or eat organic food. I will almost never mention the word organic in the farmers market. I will talk about all the other things that encompass the whole concept of organic. I will talk about all the things we've mentioned here today, whether it's health or whether it's environment, whether it's soil, whatever it is, you will mention it. But if somebody says to me, "You're not really an organic farmer, are you?" then I will go ape. I mean, I'm completely proud to be an organic farmer. Will always proclaim my organicness. I'm proud to have worked for the organic movement and proud to be an organic grower. I'm proud that my family continue to want to be organic growers and continue to eat organic food. And nothing can take that away. I don't think it's necessary to shout all the time from the rooftop what you are. I don't. And there's perfectly good arguments to say that's wrong, but I don't believe them personally.
Yeah. We have an interesting thing in this country. And again, that was about, my question was actually a little more about the actual reality of the difference in the food. But to respond to what you just said, there's a big movement right now in America industry-led for something called regenerative agriculture. Has that appeared in England? Is that a major topic of conversation?
Yes, it is. It has appeared. And is it a major topic of conversation? Well, it could be. People like me were, because we knew what was happening in the United States when it happened, when Rodale sort of kicked it off. And I wasn't in favor of it then at all. I was completely against it. And in some ways, I still am, because the situation hasn't changed, because it's at its most coarse, regenerative agriculture can be seen as ways where large-scale conventional farms can carry on being conventional farms, but actually put it under another name in order to gain some sort of pecuniary interest or uplift. And I think that's just appalling. However, I have voluntarily changed a lot in my view since the recent uplift, and it is quite substantial. I don't know how much, but quite a lot. Because amongst them, I know a lot of farmers who genuinely want to be respectful of the environment, respectful of the health aspects of food in whatever way they believe it to be healthy, and of the health of the environment. And so they are going ways which is reducing the amount of chemicals used. So clover is taking over enormously in grassland, because by and large you can produce almost as much benefit of food produced, particularly for animals, by using clover and rotations as you can with nitrogen. In cereals, it's a slightly different question, and in vegetables, it certainly is a different question. But in most livestock farming, which is the main enterprise in Britain, you can do quite well with it. Where the problem lies, where I get myself completely stuck, is trying to be supportive of regenerative farming when it comes to particularly cereal people, or people who want to go into min-till or type systems of farming, because the whole word of glyphosate then suddenly appears, and that's a no-no. I mean, for me, that's the end. I think there's nothing that can be said, in my opinion, in favor of glyphosate. And so if you're getting to the stage where you are going in a good direction environmentally, but you're still using glyphosate, unless you can come up with some way that you're phasing it out quite clearly and being held to the feet to the fire to phase the stuff out over a relatively short period of years, certainly no more than 4 or 5 years, then I think there's nothing to say at all about regenerative farming. Because regeneration really means it's not organic farming. Organic farming is about a system that goes on and goes on and goes on and goes on. Whereas regeneration means you bring something back from the dead, if you like, and you recover it in order for it to go on and on and on and on, like organic farming. That to me is a great, great thing to do. But other than that, no, I don't believe it at all. But the way of the world would dictate maybe different things will happen.
Yes, I know. We don't seem to be in charge of much of anything. No. Peter, to just jump back to that other conversation for a minute, let me give a more stark example.
Yeah.
Right now in America, in the USDA's certification program, hydroponically grown food can be certified as organic and is being certified on a massive level.
Yeah.
In the case of berries, tomatoes, greens, this is happening in a pretty big way. And for example, out of curiosity, I just bought a little pint of certified organic blueberries from Peru. Uh, they were tasteless, slightly bitter, huge, and almost certainly hydroponic. Almost all of the production in Peru is hydroponic. And when I compare that to the berries that my friend Hugh and Lisa Kent grow in beautiful living soil down in Florida, and they are extraordinarily delicious. I mean, strikingly so. Very few people put those in their mouth and their eyes don't go up and they go, oh my goodness. And, we've got very famous chefs going, these are fantastic. No chef, famous or otherwise, is going to eat those hydroponic berries and say they're fantastic. So my question is, if we can no longer look to organic certification as a way of trying to suss out how something was grown, yes, we will say, assuming there isn't outright fraud, that they didn't spray them with a prohibited pesticide. Although, in fact, I have proof that they are using things like glyphosate in hydroponic production immediate, weeks within getting that pot certified, because they go, that's my land, not the ground. So do you have thoughts about that? How do we handle this thing that we've spent our lives building and protecting?
It's easy to say we've done it over here by legislation, in the same way as you have done it over there, and the difference only is the power of the large food corporations. Now, do we have large food corporations over here? Well, for sure we do. And do we have large retailers with huge power? Of course we do. So what's the difference, really? It's a hard question to answer, very hard, Dave, because all I can say is that we have worked a long time following Schumacher's advice when he said to me, what you have to do, Peter, is you have to educate the public to do the research on the research of food and farming, and educate the public. And that's basically where we fell out with Lady Eve Balfour. I said to her, that's what we want to do exactly what Schumacher advised us to go to the public and campaign to take this research of all the research we're doing all over the world to the public and educate them properly. And she had a different view. She had a slightly different view about it, and so we fell out.
Can I ask, Peter, what was her view? What did she want to do that was different?
She believed that the people who were involved in producing food and taking it to the public and doing campaigns were doing it for commercial reasons. And yet, and where she lost the battle, she told me that you guys have to stop this, or we're not going to get on. And basically, I said to her that the things we are doing are exactly what everybody else had advised us we should be doing and what we want to do, including all your friends. And it was true that in the end, the argument came down to votes in the Soil Association when all her closest and oldest friends, people like Mary Langman, that you might know, but your colleagues, yes. Mary became one of my closest friends and one of Patrick's closest friends, one of Lawrence's closest. She loved what the young ones were doing. She said, there's no future without supporting you guys. And she hammered away at Eve Balfour, who just was in a state she wouldn't listen. And it was sad. And we regretted it, but we couldn't change. And there was no way to persuade her differently. And it became like that when you have that situation where it's quite a delicate, I don't know about whether in the British mentality, there is something that says, we really don't know about this stuff about pesticides, but we don't like it. We don't know if it does you any harm or not, because I'm still living and I've been eating it, but we don't like it. Somehow we don't trust it. And so if we got a chance to avoid it, we will avoid it. And so it then is a question of how to make it available to as many people in as many places as possible, and to find ways of educating and doing research to prove fundamental differences exist. And I think it seems to be when that happens, you can get a government or a supermarket group, even though they're Tesco's, which are the biggest in Britain and one of the biggest in the world, will not do something obvious like do what you're doing in America at the moment. Take something like a blueberry and possibly cause an upset amongst their customers. Not necessarily all of them, but even a few of them. They don't want it, they don't trust it, they don't want to lose a single customer. And so does that mean that they will never have a hydroponic fruit in the UK? I don't know that. I mean, you would be a fool to be quite declamatory about that, but I don't think so. I think it's as long as the farmers, the producers, don't try cheating, and as long as our system is robust enough to ensure that doesn't happen, if it's possible, then I think that we're okay. It's where once the bridge has been cracked a little bit, the dam opens and you're in trouble then.
Yeah.
And I think it's
absolutely
gone past. And the only thing you can do is just to keep doing what you're doing. I mean, I read your stuff every week. I think what you guys are doing is wonderful. I mean, just extraordinary. You and your colleague Linley and other people there are just wonderful. And I've read about Hugh Kent for years and years. I don't know him, but I've read about him for years. And I wish I could have his berries.
they're so good.
But it's, yeah.
Yes. All right. Listen, we'll just have to have another conversation, Peter, because we're out of time, but I'm not out of questions. And so we'll continue another time. Thank you very much.
It's been very nice to talk to you, and thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. Our movement is growing because you're subscribing and sharing these podcasts with your friends. So keep it up and leave us a rating and a review as well so that others can find us. You can find a video version of this interview on our newly designed website, realorganicproject.org, or on our YouTube channel. And you can join us every Thursday for a new episode featuring voices from the organic movement. See you next time.